Hey everyone, how's it going? Just out for a little walk here. I wanted to get my weekly video recorded. It's a nice, beautiful day here in New Hampshire finally. And spring has not really been that beautiful here. So taking these nice spring days as we can get them. But I just wanted to create a video because I was reading something, a study as one does at breakfast. Yeah, weirdo. About the study was basically comparing two groups of people. I'm not going to get all the details correctly here, but to summarize it, to get the idea. As two groups of people, one group was both groups are consuming ultra processed foods. So foods that don't come in packages and don't really look like whole foods, like fruits, vegetables, meats, that type of stuff. But one group was consuming high protein ultra processed foods. And the other one was consuming just your traditional ultra processed food, which is typically high in fat and high in carbohydrates. And what they were comparing to say was the high protein ultra processed food diet, whether that group consumed more or less or the same amount of calories compared to the normal ultra processed food group. And I didn't have a chance to read through the entire study, but it seems like it was pretty well done. They measured these people's energy expenditure and caloric intake. They were in a metabolic ward, which is like you're trapped inside a room, and the whole purpose of this room is to measure your energy expenditure. It's probably it is the best way to do it. And also they were given all their meals while they were spending the time in that metabolic ward. I think it was something like a day and a half they were in there. 2.5 days, sorry. Anyways, so it seemed like it was pretty well done. And at the end of the study, what they found was that the high protein ultra processed food group did consume less calories than the traditional kind of ultra processed food group. So even though both groups were consuming ultra processed foods, the one that had the higher protein content did end up consuming less calories. But the other thing that the study concluded was that both groups, both the high protein ultra processed food group and the traditional ultra processed food group, they both overconsumed calories, meaning they both ate more calories than they expended when eating these foods. And so this highlights a couple of things that are important nuances as we try to navigate our food environment. And that is, first, obviously, it's another bonus for protein. And traditionally, like when I talk about consuming protein, I'm always talking about consuming protein in its natural food form. This is regardless of any kind of food, actually. It's better to eat the food in its whole food form because it does help regulate appetite, right? So even though we talk about how protein is very satiating and helps you eat less food because it is eating a piece of meat or some lentils or beans or whatnot, whatever your favorite whole food protein source is, it's not hyper palatable. You can only eat so much of it before you start to get full, and the calories are very low. And that's true of almost universally of whole foods in general. So when I talk about eating enough protein, that's one of the benefits, right? You get full for a lot less calories, and it helps you control the amount of food you're eating. But even though this was an ultra processed protein source, right? So it was not in its whole food form, and it was hyperpalatable, I still seemed to, at least for this study, to help the participants eat less calories overall. So this is something that another aspect of protein intake that a lot of researchers are theorizing. It's not necessarily proven as far as I understand it, but theorizing is that one of the other aspects of eating enough protein and the reason why it helps control appetite is that there's something called a protein leverage hypothesis, meaning that protein is so important for your body. It's not something that we can store in our body, that if we don't eat enough protein, that we'll continue to try and eat food until we get enough protein to satisfy our needs. So one of the problems with kind of the standard American diet in ultra processed foods is they're typically devoid of protein. That means not only do they just taste good and don't shut off your appetite, your body will naturally increase your appetite because it thinks it hasn't gotten enough protein yet to survive, right? And so your brain is telling your body to eat more because it needs more protein. And that compounds with the hyperpalatability of ultra processed foods as well. And that makes the problem even worse. So this study kind of leverages a little, or hints at maybe that protein leverage hypothesis being somewhat correct, because even though these foods were hyperpalatable, they still, but the group that was eating enough of the high protein, hyperpalatable foods, ultra processed foods, ate a little bit less because they got that protein signal turned off in their brain. The other thing is, to the point that I was just not talking about before, these are ultra processed high protein foods. That means it is easy to overeat them, and they typically contain a lot more calories than a whole food protein source. So just because, and this just speaks to our modern environment, right? Protein is a very hot topic. And so now everything is with added protein into it. You see it on the label of everything, the food store, grocery store. And most of the time, actually, it's not really that high protein. So this thing that there's 10 grams of protein, it's high protein. But that's not high protein. You get 10 grams of protein, you ate 300 calories. That's the protein to calorie ratio on that thing is pretty poor. Just because something is high protein, if it is ultra processed, it generally means it's also high calorie, because it's not just protein in there. In fact, most food companies are going to put the least amount of protein they can get away with in there, because protein is the most expensive macronutrient and a food component in a food item. In order to lower the cost, they're going to put less protein. They're going to add more fat and carbs because that's going to make it taste better. And at the end of the day, you end up with this. Maybe it has, let's say it does have 20 grams of protein in it, which is moderate protein, I would say. It might have 500 calories, right? So the protein to calorie ratio of these ultra processed food items is pretty poor, meaning in order to eat a high protein diet comprised of ultra processed high protein foods, you're eating a lot more calories. And that's what we saw in the studies, that they still overate those calories, and the food still tastes good, right? For example, I've done videos on the various kind of healthy cereal alternatives, many of which consider themselves high protein. Like, if you're going to use those items, you have to be mindful about them. You have to measure them. You have to be just measured in your consumption of them, because if not, you will overeat them, because they're still ultra processed foods. And you have to, it's great sometimes that some of these convenience foods, health foods, have a little bit more protein in them, but it's not really, I'm not telling you to it's not a good idea to try and meet your protein goal from ultra processed high protein foods. You still want to focus on eating whole foods, meat, fish, chicken, eggs, beans, lentils, if that's your type of thing, and really focus on those types of foods in order to hit 95% of your protein goal. If you get the other 5% for some ultra processed foods, okay, fine. But you need to be very measured about those foods in your diet, how they're used, how much of them you're consuming, and all that stuff, in order to make sure you're still keeping your calories in check as well. So I just wanted to share that little anecdote with you. I know, these, like I said, everything is now high protein, and there are certainly some couple of high protein ultra processed foods that I think are legitimately high protein, not just marketing material, but they're still ultra processed, high calorie, easy to overconsume and eat. So you got to be very mindful of them, because at the end of the day, you're more likely to overconsume calories if you're going to consume ultra processed high protein foods, even though protein will help you eat less and has a lot of benefits. So with that, I hope everyone has a great week, and I'll talk to you all next week.